They say the people who smile the most often hide the darkest secrets. I used to think that was a quote meant for movies, not for real life. But now, after everything that happened, I know it was written for people like my father. My name is Amelia Hart, and this is the story of how I destroyed the man who created me, not out of hate, but out of justice. I grew up in Surrey, in a house that smelled of old money and new lies. My father, Richard Hart, was a respected businessman. Everyone in town adored him. He donated to charities, attended every local event, and shook hands like he was handing out blessings. To the world, he was the definition of a gentleman. To me, he was everything a father should be. My mother, however, never shared that view. She used to stare at him across the dinner table with a kind of quiet tension I didn't understand as a child. I remember asking her once, "Mom, why don't you smile when Dad talks?" She just said, "Because sometimes silence is the only power left." I didn't understand what she meant back then. Growing up, my life looked perfect from the outside. Private schools, piano lessons, summer trips to Italy. But what no one saw were the cracks forming in the walls of our family. My father had a habit of disappearing for days, claiming he was on business trips. I believed him. I always believed him. Because that's what daughters do when their fathers tell them they're heroes. Things changed when I turned 23. My mother died suddenly, a car accident, they said. My father was devastated, or at least he looked that way. I remember him holding me at the funeral, whispering, "It's just us now, Amy. You and me." That was the moment I felt closest to him, and ironically, the moment I stepped deeper into the web he'd spun. After my mother's death, I moved back home for a while. The house felt empty, but strangely alive with secrets. My father had a new assistant named Evelyn, a woman in her 30s who dressed too perfectly and smiled too politely. Something about her presence made me uncomfortable, though I couldn't explain why. My father said she was helping him manage his affairs while he grieved. I wanted to believe that. But one night, I walked into his study to find him arguing on the phone. His voice was sharp, panicked. "No, you listen to me," he hissed. "If anyone finds out what we did, we both go down." I froze behind the door, my heart pounding. When he hung up, I slipped away quietly, pretending I hadn't heard a thing. That night was the first time I questioned who my father really was. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing things, bank statements that didn't make sense, documents locked in drawers, and Evelyn coming to the house late at night. The more I looked, the more uneasy I felt. I tried to ignore it, convincing myself grief was making me paranoid. But deep down, a small voice whispered that something was horribly wrong. One evening, I decided to confront him. "Dad," I said, standing in his office doorway, "why do you always keep that study locked?" He smiled the way people do when they're trying to disarm you. "Some things are private, Amelia. You'll understand when you have a family of your own." His words sounded kind, but his eyes didn't. They looked like they were guarding a war. That night I couldn't sleep. Curiosity turned into obsession. I waited until he left for a business dinner, then picked the lock on his study using an old trick my mother once taught me. Inside, the air smelled of whiskey and old paper. His desk was immaculate, except for one drawer that refused to open. I found a small key taped under the desk, and when I used it, my hands trembled. Inside were photos. Dozens of them. My father with another woman. My father with her children. Birth certificates. Financial records. He had another family. For years. My knees gave out, and I sat on the floor staring at the proof of everything I didn't want to believe. Suddenly, my mother's silences, her pain, her cold eyes at dinner, they all made sense. She had known. She had lived with that truth and carried it to her grave. I wanted to scream. But something inside me shifted instead. The tears didn't come. The rage did. When my father returned that night, I pretended everything was fine. I smiled, poured him a drink, and asked about his trip. He talked like nothing was wrong. I watched him carefully, studying the man who had lied to me my entire life. That's when I decided he wasn't going to get away with it. Not the affair. Not the lies. Not my mother's death, because the more I thought about it, the less it felt like an accident. Over the next few days, I began my quiet investigation. I found old insurance documents, emails between him and his other wife, and messages where he'd transferred large sums of money. It was clear now my mother's death had benefited him financially. Her life insurance was in his name, and a week after her funeral, he'd purchased property abroad. I wanted to confront him, but revenge like this needed patience. I wanted him to feel his world crumble, piece by piece, the same way he'd done to us. So I started with small things. I sent anonymous emails to his business partners hinting at financial misconduct. I forwarded copies of suspicious documents to tax authorities. I leaked one of his company's confidential reports online. It didn't take long before the whispers started. His colleagues stopped trusting him. His company's board launched an internal investigation. And through it all, I smiled, playing the role of the supportive daughter who just wanted her father to be okay. One evening, he came home furious. "Someone's trying to ruin me," he snapped. I looked up from my cup of tea and asked softly, "Do you think it's personal?" He studied me for a moment, suspicion flickering in his eyes. Then he shook his head. "No, it's business. It always is." He still didn't know. But as I watched him pace the room, cursing and sweating, I realized how fragile he truly was. The man who once seemed invincible was just a coward in an expensive suit. And that was the beginning of his unraveling. What I didn't know then was that the truth went far deeper than an affair or financial betrayal. There was another secret, one buried with my mother, waiting for me to find it. A secret that would make me question not just who my father was, but who I really was. I couldn't sleep after that night. My father's secrets sat in my chest like stones, heavy and unrelenting. I kept replaying my mother's face in my mind, the way she looked the night before her accident, quiet, distant, almost like she already knew her time was running out. At the time, I'd assumed it was grief or exhaustion. Now, I wondered if it was fear. The next morning, I decided to visit the police station where her case had been filed. It had been closed years ago, ruled a simple loss of control on a rainy road. When I asked to see the old report, the officer looked at me strangely. "Family?" he asked. "Yes, I'm her daughter." He handed me the file without hesitation, maybe assuming I was there for closure. Closure. What a beautiful lie that word is. The report was brief. According to it, my mother's car had skidded near a sharp bend on the A3 motorway. No witnesses, no mechanical faults, no alcohol involved. Just another tragic accident. But something about the photos felt off. The damage didn't match the angle of the road. The front tire marks looked deliberate, like someone had nudged her off the edge. I showed the pictures to an old university friend, Oliver, who worked in vehicle forensics. He examined them for a few minutes, frowning. "This isn't a skid, Amelia," he said quietly. "This is a push. You can see the second set of tire marks, smaller, probably from another car." My stomach turned cold. "So, someone hit her?" I asked. "Not hit. Tapped. Enough to make her lose control." He looked up at me serious. If this is real, it wasn't an accident. For hours after that, I sat in my car staring at nothing. The man I called my father was now the only person who benefited from her death and the only person who could have been on that road. But why? What had she known that made her dangerous to him? I returned home and watched him more closely. He moved through the house like a man rehearsing normalcy. He laughed at the television, whistled while making coffee, asked about my work. But every word felt staged. I kept thinking about the phone call I'd overheard weeks ago. If anyone finds out what we did, that was haunting me. So I searched deeper. One night, after he went to bed, I went through his computer. Most files were encrypted, but one folder was hidden in plain sight, labeled Accounts. Inside were documents, transactions linked to offshore accounts, all dated around the time of my mother's death. And there it was, a transfer made 2 days before her accident. A payment of £50,000 to a name I didn't recognize, Marcus D. I Googled him. Marcus Dalton. A former employee of my father's company. Dismissed for unethical practices. The records were vague, but one article mentioned an internal scandal buried by the firm. It was enough to make my pulse race. I found Marcus's address and went to see him. He lived in a crumbling flat on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where hope went to die. When he opened the door, his eyes widened in recognition. "You're Richard's daughter." It wasn't a question. "Yes," I said. "And I think you know something about my mother's death." He looked terrified, glancing over his shoulder before stepping aside. "You shouldn't be here," he muttered. "If your father finds out." "He won't," I cut him off. "Tell me the truth." He hesitated, then sighed. "Your mom was going to expose him. The fraud, the embezzlement, all of it. She found out about his second family, the offshore accounts, the fake charities. She was planning to go to the authorities." "And the accident?" I whispered. He looked away. He asked me to follow her that night, to make sure she didn't go through with it. He said he just wanted to scare her, make her stop. I never meant for her to die. I tapped her car, that's all, I swear. I couldn't breathe. My world tilted, soundless and still. "He paid you to kill her," I said slowly. "No," Marcus insisted. "He paid me to stop her. But after it happened, he paid me again, to disappear." I left without another word. The night air felt heavier than ever before. My father wasn't just a liar. He was a murderer. And he'd built his empire on blood and silence. For days, I couldn't look at him. He'd walk past me in the hall, ask if I was okay, and I'd nod, holding my rage behind a smile. Every lie he told, every act of fake kindness, I memorized them all. Because when I took him down, I wanted him to remember every moment he thought he'd gotten away with it. Revenge, I realized, wasn't about hurting him physically. It was about making him see what he'd destroyed, piece by piece. So I began to set the trap. I started by gathering evidence, copies of Marcus's confession, financial records, emails, everything. I kept it all on a secure drive, far away from home. Then I began manipulating the narrative. I used my contacts in local media, leaking anonymous tips about corruption in my father's firm. Within weeks, headlines started to appear. Prominent businessman under investigation. Charity fraud scandal tied to Hart Enterprises. He panicked, of course. His calls grew frantic. His tone colder. "Someone's targeting me," he said one morning, pacing the kitchen. "They're digging up things that don't exist." I just watched him. "Maybe they exist more than you think," I said softly. He stopped, looking at me for a long moment. I could see the question forming in his eyes, but he didn't ask it. Maybe he didn't want the answer. That night, he drank more than usual. I heard him in his study, muttering to himself, slamming drawers. Around midnight, I peeked in. The room was a mess, papers everywhere. He looked up at me wild-eyed. "They're going to destroy me, Amelia. Everything I've built." "Then maybe it wasn't built right," I said. For a moment, his expression shifted. Something dangerous flickered in his eyes, the real Richard Hart, stripped of his mask. "You sound just like your mother," he said, his voice low. And look where that got her. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut through bone. He realized what he'd said only after it left his mouth. But by then, it was too late. I just smiled, turned, and walked out. That was the night I decided to end it. Not by killing him, but by letting him kill himself, with fear, with guilt, with the weight of his own secrets collapsing on top of him. The next morning, I sent an email from an anonymous account to every major investor in his company, attaching copies of his fraudulent records. Within hours, the market reacted. Shares plummeted, contracts were canceled, and by evening, the board had called an emergency meeting. He didn't go. He just sat in his study, staring at the floor, motionless. I watched him from the doorway, the man who had once ruled my life now crumbling under his own lies. But even as I stood there, satisfied, a strange thought crept into my mind. If he could destroy my mother for protecting the truth, what was he capable of doing to me once he found out I was behind this? That night, I locked my bedroom door for the first time in years. And still, through the silence of the house, I heard him whisper my name. I used to think revenge would make me feel free, but freedom is a strange thing. It doesn't arrive with peace. It comes wrapped in noise, guilt, and sleepless nights. The morning after the scandal broke, my father didn't leave his study. The house that once echoed with his confidence now felt like a tomb. I listened from the hallway as his phone rang endlessly. Business partners, lawyers, journalists, all demanding answers. I'd expected chaos, but I hadn't expected the silence that followed it. The silence of a man realizing he'd lost control. For days, he barely ate. He'd sit by the window, staring into the garden like he was watching the ghosts of his own choices. I wanted to feel triumphant, but what I felt instead was hollow. It wasn't sympathy, it was confusion. I had waited years for this. Why didn't it feel like victory? Then something changed. On the fifth night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps outside my room. Slow, deliberate. I sat up, holding my breath. The doorknob turned slightly, then stopped. After a long pause, the footsteps retreated. The next morning, he acted normal, cheerful even. "Good morning, sweetheart," he said, pouring coffee like nothing had happened. "You slept well." "Fine," I lied. My hands were shaking. He smiled. "Good. You've seemed different lately." The way he said it wasn't loving, it was observant, like he was studying a suspect. From that moment, I knew he was starting to suspect me. So I shifted my strategy. I needed to stay invisible, play the loyal daughter again, feed him comfort while his world collapsed. I started cooking dinner, asking about his day, pretending I still believed his lies. It worked for a while. He relaxed, maybe even convinced himself that I couldn't possibly betray him. But beneath that surface, a new kind of tension grew between us. Every conversation felt like a chess match, two people smiling while waiting for the other to move first. One evening, I found him in the living room, staring at old family photographs. "She would have hated what's happening," he murmured, touching my mother's picture. "She would have hated what you became," I said before I could stop myself. He turned slowly, his eyes cold. "Careful, Amelia." "Careful of what?" I asked. "Of saying things you can't take back." For the first time, he didn't look like my father. He looked like a stranger wearing his face. That night, I started packing a small bag, just in case. I didn't trust him anymore, not even to let me sleep safely in that house. But I couldn't leave yet. I hadn't finished what I started. I decided to dig deeper, not into his finances this time, but into his psychology. If I was going to destroy him, it wouldn't be with police reports or bank statements. It would be with the truth he couldn't face, his own guilt. So I began leaving reminders around the house, subtle things only he would notice. A framed photo of my mother moved to his desk. Her old perfume sprayed faintly in the hallway. A copy of the accident report left open on his chair. At first, he ignored them. Then he began to flinch. By the third day, I found him pacing in the kitchen, muttering to himself. She's gone, he kept saying. His hands were shaking. I acted surprised. Dad, are you okay? He turned on me sharply. Don't play games, Amelia. You think I don't know what you're doing? I froze. What do you mean? He stepped closer, his voice low. You think I don't see her in you? The same looks, the same tone. You're punishing me, just like she did. I forced a laugh. You're imagining things. Am I? He leaned closer. Then why does this house smell like her again? For a moment, I saw genuine fear in his eyes, the kind of fear that comes from guilt that won't die. It thrilled me and terrified me at the same time. After he left the room, I locked myself in and cried. Not because I pitied him, but because I realized I was becoming him, manipulative, calculating, haunted. The revenge that once felt like justice was starting to rot inside me. 2 nights later, he disappeared. No note, no message. His car was gone, and his phone went straight to voicemail. At first, I thought he'd run, fled the country to escape the investigations. But when the police called me the next morning, my blood ran cold. They said his car had been found near the same stretch of road where my mother died. The driver's seat was empty. The door left open. No sign of him. History had repeated itself. Only this time, there were no skid marks. They said he might have crashed into the river, but there were no tire marks, no broken glass, no body. Just the car, silent and open to the rain. The same way my mother's was found 15 years ago. It felt like déjà vu, only this time, I was the one left standing in the storm. People whispered that he'd run away, that he couldn't face the scandal or the guilt. But deep inside, I knew something didn't add up. My father was too proud to vanish quietly. If he wanted to escape, he would have done it with a press conference and a speech about betrayal. This disappearance was different. The police questioned me for hours. I played the grieving daughter perfectly. Tearful, confused, broken. I'd learned long ago how to fake emotions around men who only saw weakness as a weapon. But the moment they left, I felt something strange, a pull, a presence. It started small. Footsteps in the corridor when I was alone. A shadow crossing the hallway light. A whisper that sounded like my name. At first, I thought it was guilt. Or paranoia. Or maybe karma finally collecting its debt. But then, things began to move around the house. His study door, which I always kept locked, would be open in the morning. His favorite pen, the one I'd placed on his desk as a psychological trap, was gone. And then came the messages. Anonymous emails. 1 sentence each. The first said, "You think it's over?" The second, "You learned well from your mother." And the third, "Come to the river." I didn't tell anyone. I couldn't. I knew this wasn't over, not yet. Whether it was my father or someone else, the story wasn't finished. And part of me didn't want it to be. I wanted to see how far this could go. So one night, I drove to the river. The same bridge. The same cold wind. The same emptiness. I parked near the barrier, stepped out, and waited. The only sound was the current below, dark, steady, merciless. Then I saw it. A figure standing by the trees, half in shadow. Too still to be human. My throat went dry. I called out, "Dad." No answer. I took a few steps forward, my shoes sinking in the wet soil. "If this is a joke, stop it," I shouted. And then, in a whisper barely louder than the wind, I heard it. "Why did you take her side?" It was his voice. Broken. Raw. I froze. You shouldn't be here, I said. He stepped into the light. His face was pale, unshaven, his eyes sunken like he hadn't slept in days. Neither should you, he said. You've become her. What are you talking about? He smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't belong to sanity. Your mother did the same to me, Amelia. She destroyed everything. You just finished what she started. That's not true. She wanted me gone. She wanted me to suffer. He pointed at the river. And now you've brought me back here to finish her work. The fear in my chest twisted into anger. You killed her, I snapped. You don't get to rewrite that. His expression changed. Slowly, painfully, he whispered, she wasn't supposed to die. What? He took another step forward. It was an accident, but not the way you think. She wasn't alone that night. My heart stopped. What do you mean she wasn't alone? She called me from the car. She said she knew. She found out about your real father. The world tilted. My knees nearly gave out. What are you saying? You're not mine, Amelia, he said softly. You were her secret. Her revenge on me. For a moment, the world went silent. Just the wind and the river and the sound of my heartbeat cracking apart. All those years of hate. All the guilt. All the revenge, built on a lie. I stumbled back, shaking my head. You're lying. He reached for me. You think I'd make that up now? I turned and ran. I didn't stop until I was in the car, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. Behind me, he didn't follow. He just stood there, staring at the water. That was the last time I saw him. They found his body 2 days later, floating near the rocks. The police called it suicide. I called it closure. But it wasn't. Because 2 weeks later, I got another message. This time, from an unknown number. It said only one thing. He wasn't lying. I didn't sleep for days after the message arrived. He wasn't lying. The words burned inside my head like a whisper I couldn't silence. I'd spent my entire life defining myself by the hatred I had for my father, by the betrayal I thought he'd done to my mother. But what if everything I believed was wrong? What if I was the betrayal? The message came from an encrypted number. No name, no trace. When I tried replying, it bounced back instantly. But then, 3 nights later, another message arrived. There's something in her safety deposit box. Bank of Manchester. Box 47. My mother's bank account had been closed after her death. I'd never even known about a safety box. My hands shook as I drove to the bank the next morning. The clerk hesitated, but eventually let me in. I was her only child, after all. Inside the box was a sealed envelope, old and yellowed, with my name written in her handwriting. My throat tightened as I opened it. There were photographs. Dozens of them. My mother smiling, holding a man's hand. A man who wasn't my father. He was tall, with dark hair, sharp eyes, and something unsettlingly familiar about him. I flipped through the photos until one made me drop everything. It was him. The same man who'd visited my school when I was 12. I remembered him now. He'd told me he was an old friend of my father's. He'd given me a red bracelet and said, "You remind me of someone." The same bracelet I still had in my drawer. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. I searched the box again and found a birth certificate. My birth certificate. Only this one wasn't the same as the one I had at home. The father's name was different. Michael Harland. I whispered the name out loud. It didn't sound real. It sounded like a ghost from a life I'd never lived. I looked him up. Michael Harland, a former neurologist, last known address in London, retired after a car accident 15 years ago. My stomach dropped. The same year my mother died. Coincidence? No. Nothing about my life was coincidence anymore. I booked a train to London the next day. When I found his house, it was small, old, hidden behind untrimmed hedges. The kind of place people go when they don't want to be found. I almost turned back, but something pulled me to the door. An old man opened it. His face was weathered, but those same sharp eyes looked right through me. He didn't even ask who I was. He just said, "I was wondering when you'd come." I froze. "You know who I am?" He nodded. "Of course. You're Margaret's daughter. You look exactly like her." My voice trembled. "You're Michael Harland." "I was," he said quietly, "before your father made sure that name died." I stepped inside, my mind spinning. The house smelled of dust and old books. On the mantel, there were photos, my mother, younger, happier. "Why didn't you ever come for me?" I asked. He sighed. "Your mother wanted to keep you safe. She told me he'd hurt you if he found out." I frowned. "But he found out, didn't he?" Michael's eyes darkened. "Yes. The night she died, he called me. He told me she was gone. Said it was an accident. But I knew him well enough to know he was lying." "Then why didn't you go to the police?" I demanded. He laughed bitterly. "The police? Your father owned half of them. He was untouchable. All I could do was disappear and wait." I stared at him, my whole identity collapsing under the weight of his words. "You mean, all these years, you just hid?" "I waited," he said, looking straight into my eyes. "For you." I took a step back. "What do you mean?" He walked to a drawer, pulled out a file, and dropped it on the table. Inside were documents, photos, letters, legal reports, all showing the corruption behind my father's company. Bribes, offshore accounts, falsified medical research. "He ruined me," Michael said. "He stole my career, my reputation. And when your mother threatened to expose him, he silenced her." "You think revenge started with you, Amelia?" "It started long before you were even born." I couldn't breathe. He handed me a small black drive. "This," he said, "is everything you need to finish what she started. To destroy his name completely." "But he's dead," I whispered. Michael's eyes didn't waver. "Are you sure?" I froze. "What do you mean?" He smiled faintly. "Your father was too smart to die by accident. That body they found, did they ever show you the face?" My pulse quickened. "No, they said it was too decomposed." "Exactly," he said softly. "Then you still have work to do." Before I could speak, he added something that made my blood run cold. "You should check the sender of those messages." They weren't from me. I blinked. "Then who?" But before I could finish, a loud bang echoed outside, like glass shattering. Michael's expression changed instantly. He pushed me behind a wall. "They found us," he whispered. "Who?" I hissed. He didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his coat and handed me a key. "Go to locker 17 at the London Central Station. Whatever happens, don't trust anyone who says they knew your father." Before I could move, the front window exploded. I screamed as Michael fell, clutching his chest. Blood spread across his shirt. "Run," he gasped. "Now." And I did. As I ran into the dark street, one thought echoed in my head, louder than the sirens, louder than my heartbeat. If my father wasn't dead, then he was the one sending the messages. And he wanted me to find the truth, his truth. By the time I reached the train station, the world outside had turned into a blur of neon lights and rain. My mind was racing, my hands still shaking with the image of Michael collapsing in front of me. His blood on my jacket. His voice echoing in my head. "Locker 17. Don't trust anyone who says they knew your father." I moved through the crowd like a ghost. People brushed past me, laughing, talking, living. And I was just trying not to fall apart. The locker area was almost empty. I found 17, inserted the key, and turned it slowly. The lock clicked. Inside was a black briefcase. No name, no tag. Just cold metal. I pulled it out, heart pounding. Inside, there were 3 things. a phone, a flash drive, and a folded letter. The letter was addressed to Amelia Harland. Not Smith. Harland. My real name. I unfolded it. The handwriting was unmistakable, my father's. If you're reading this, Amelia, it means you've found him. Good. You were always clever, too clever maybe. Your mother thought the truth would save you. I knew it would destroy you. Now, you get to decide who you really are, hers or mine. My breath caught. The rest of the letter was coordinates, a remote estate outside London. At the bottom, one final line. You want answers? Come home. Home. The word felt poisonous. But I couldn't stop now. I drove for 2 hours through the storm until I reached the address, an old countryside manor I didn't recognize. The windows were dark, the gate chained open. I stepped inside, clutching the phone from the briefcase. As soon as I did, it lit up. A video started playing automatically. It was a recording, my father sitting in what looked like this very same room. His face was gaunt, but his eyes, those eyes hadn't changed. Hello, Amelia. I assume by now you've met the good doctor, he said. He told you a version of the story. But he left out the parts that mattered. He leaned closer to the camera. Your mother wasn't innocent. She wasn't some victim caught between two men. She was the one who started everything. My heart pounded. She loved me once, he continued. Then she met him, the charming neurologist who wanted to fix broken minds. And when he realized she couldn't be controlled, he decided to make her a test subject. That's how the accident happened. Not an accident, an experiment gone wrong. I felt sick. He's lying, I whispered. He has to be lying. You think I killed her, but you're wrong, he said, almost tenderly. I tried to save her. And when she died, I buried the truth to protect you. But now that he's back, you deserve to see for yourself. The video ended abruptly. I sat there in silence, my mind tearing itself apart. Who was lying? Who was I? Then the phone buzzed again. A new message. Turn around. I froze. Slowly I turned. And there he was. My father. Alive. Older, thinner, but alive. Standing right there in the shadows, watching me. For a moment, I couldn't speak. My throat closed. You're dead, I whispered. He smiled faintly. That's what they wanted you to believe. Who? He stepped closer. Michael. The same man who pretended to be your savior. The one who tried to erase me, just like he erased her. I shook my head. You're lying. He tried to protect me. Protect you? My father laughed coldly. He used you, Amelia. Just like he used your mother. He wanted you to destroy me so he could finish what he started, to erase my name, my legacy, my research. Research? I asked. He gestured toward the briefcase. Open the drive. You'll see. I hesitated. Why should I trust you? Because, he said softly, you already did. Every time you looked in the mirror. I plugged the drive into the laptop on the table. Files loaded, hundreds of them. Medical records. Brain scan data. Experimental notes signed by Dr. Michael Harland. All involving one subject. Subject M.H. Margaret Harland. My mother. She had been part of his study. A psychological conditioning project, manipulating memory and emotional control. The last entry read, severe emotional regression. Subject unstable. Accident probable. My heart shattered. Michael hadn't loved her. He'd used her. And when things went wrong, he'd made it look like my father's fault. I looked at the man in front of me, the man I'd spent my life hating, and for the first time, I didn't know what to feel. He reached out, his voice almost breaking. I never wanted to hurt you, Amelia. But I couldn't let his lies define you. That's why I staged my death, to protect the only thing I had left of her. Me, I whispered. He nodded. You. But before I could respond, a sound echoed outside, footsteps. Many. My father's expression hardened. They found us again. Who? He looked toward the door. His people. Michael's network. He had followers, scientists, investors, people who believed in his work. They want the data back. A crash. The door splintered open. Men in black stormed in with guns. My father pulled me behind the desk, shouting, "Run, Amelia." The next moments were chaos, screams, gunfire, shattered glass. I felt his hand slip from mine, heard him fall, and then I was running out into the rain, down the hill, through the darkness. When I finally reached the road, I looked back. The house was burning, and I knew whatever truth there had been, it was gone forever. The next morning, the fire was on the news. Abandoned property destroyed by explosion, the report said. No mention of bodies. No names. Just ashes. And then a final message appeared on the phone. You still don't know everything. It's been 6 months since the fire. 6 months since I ran through the rain and watched everything I thought I knew burn to the ground. The police never found bodies. They said maybe no one had been inside. But I knew better. I'd seen him fall. I'd heard him call my name. Still, a part of me kept wondering. I moved to a small flat in Manchester, quiet, anonymous. I changed my number, deleted social media, tried to disappear. But the past doesn't vanish. It lingers. It follows you. It whispers. And for me, it started whispering again 3 weeks ago. Another message. Same number. Same haunting tone. You deserve the truth. At first, I ignored it. Then came another. Locker 17 wasn't the end. Check locker 18. I told myself not to go. But curiosity is stronger than fear. So I went. Locker 18 was smaller, older, the key taped under the panel. Inside was just one thing, a small black box with a button on top. No label. No note. I pressed it. The screen lit up. A video again. This time, not of my father, but of me. Footage of me at the river. Me in London. Me opening the locker. Every move I'd made since the night he died. Then a voice, my father's. Calm. Cold. Do you understand now, Amelia? You think you've been finding the truth, but the truth has been finding you. I froze. Everything you've done, every step you've taken, I made sure of it. You weren't following clues. You were following instructions. Your revenge wasn't yours. It was mine. I couldn't breathe. When I realized Michael had turned you against me, I had to fix it. So I gave you a story, one that would lead you straight to him. I needed you to destroy him. And you did. Beautifully. My knees gave out. I dropped the device, trembling. You think I died in that fire? No, Amelia. I survived. Because I always survive. You inherited that from me. I screamed. No, you're lying. But the voice didn't stop. You've always been my greatest creation. Not my daughter, my experiment. To see if morality could be engineered, if vengeance could be learned. The video ended. The screen went black. I sat there, numb, the words echoing in my skull. Not my daughter, my experiment. I looked at my hands. Trembling. Bloody, I hadn't even noticed I'd dug my nails into my skin. Was it true? Could any of it be true? Or was this just another layer, another manipulation? I thought of my mother. Her smile. Her kindness. Her death. And suddenly, I understood something. It didn't matter which of them was lying. Because in their war, I had already lost myself. I went home and opened the laptop, the one from the briefcase. Inside, I found a single hidden file I hadn't noticed before. A folder named Project Eve. Inside were years of data, psychological conditioning experiments. all focused on one subject. Subject age female, age 5 to 28. Me. Every therapy session, every dream, every reaction recorded, analyzed, manipulated. My life hadn't been mine for years. Maybe ever. And then I saw the last entry, dated just a week before the fire. Final stage successful. Subject shows complete emotional reconstruction. Phase 2. Self-realization trigger through loss. Tears blurred my vision. He'd planned everything, even his own death. Suddenly, the phone on the table buzzed again. I didn't want to look, but I did. A message. You did well, Amelia. You finished the experiment. Then another. Now it's your turn. I stared at the screen. My reflection stared back, hollow eyes, trembling lips, something unrecognizable in my face. And then, I smiled. Because maybe he was right. Maybe I had inherited something from him. Not his lies. Not his cruelty. But his patience. His precision. And if this was still his game, it was my turn to change the rules. I deleted the message, picked up my coat, and walked out into the night. My voice, calm, steady, ready, the same tone he used when he planned his revenge. You want to see what your creation can do, Father? I whispered to the dark. Then watch. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't his experiment anymore. I was his reckoning.